My fingers hit something rigid inside the third sack from the bottom. 4 in the morning. Bare bulb swinging on its chain, flour dust hanging in the still air. I dug past the grain and pulled out a sealed bag, plastic gone cloudy white. Inside, Claire's handwriting. Her neat blue script on personal stationery, pages stuck together and powdered at the edges. My hands went cold, not from the storage room. I peeled the first page free, slow, the way you handle old paper. Word showed through the flour residue. Tori's name. The word stealing. Transfer amounts in columns, 5,000, 8,000, routed to an account number I'd never seen. And at the bottom, in script that shook where Claire's never shook, 8 words that took the air out of my lungs. She told you he chose not to come. The letter mentioned deleted messages. Across the bakery office, the old answering machine sat on Claire's desk, its red light blinking. It had been blinking for 2 years. I stood in the bakery office with Claire's letter pressed against my chest, flour dust on my hands, and tried to remember when I first learned to read paper by touch. 15 years I ran a commercial print shop on Route 42 before Claire and I ever made a loaf of bread. Hale printing, 4 Heidelberg presses, 2-color offset work for every business in the county. I loaded paper by the pallet. Hold a sheet between your thumb and forefinger, rub once, and I could tell you the mill, the weight, and whether the invoice was lying about the stock. Ink worked the same way. Offset lithography ink had a tack to it, a resistance when you pulled a sample between your fingers. Digital toner sat on the surface like paint on glass. Put a document under a loop, and you could see whether the characters were pressed into the fiber or laid on top of it. I hired people who tested their paper before running it. That was the standard. You didn't trust what the box said. You verified with your hands. Claire ran the front counter, handled billing, kept the books in a green ledger she balanced to the penny every Friday. She had a way with customers that I never managed. People came back because of her. I just made sure the ink was straight. The letter in my jacket crinkled when I shifted my weight. Claire's handwriting. Transfer amounts in columns. I pressed the heel of my hand against my sternum and kept remembering. We sold the shop in 2000, pooled everything we had, and opened Hale's Heritage Bakery on Main Street in a building that used to be a hardware store. Claire hand-painted the sign herself, gold letters on dark green. I taught myself commercial baking the same way I'd learned printing. Read the manuals, studied the chemistry, practiced until my hands knew the dough before my mind caught up. Sourdough starter is a living document. You feed it, you wait, you trust the process. 25 years we built that place into something the town depended on. Wedding cakes, church orders, the high school's graduation reception every June. My name was on the building, and Claire's fingerprints were on every customer who walked through the door. Our son Ethan grew up in that bakery. Kneading dough on a step stool at 6, running the register at 14, loading delivery vans at 17. Big kid, broad-shouldered, with Claire's dark eyes and my jawline. He was good with his hands. Steady, patient. He collected vintage radios, rebuilt them in his garage the way I rebuilt sourdough starters. Patience and steady hands. He could bring a dead receiver back to life with a soldering iron and a parts catalog. Then he turned 18 and decided he wanted to be something other than the baker's kid. Got a degree in logistics. Took a corporate job managing supply chains for a distribution company 2 counties over. Button-down shirts a size too tight in the shoulders. I didn't argue. A man makes his own choices. He met Tori at a church fundraiser when he was 28. She'd moved to town the year before. honey blonde hair, green eyes, and when she smiled, the whole room shifted toward her like she'd pulled a thread. She volunteered at the food bank, organized the Christmas toy drive, remembered every parishioner's name and their children's birthdays. "She's special, Dad," Ethan told me over the phone, "different from anyone I've met." They married 8 months later. My granddaughter Rosie was born the following spring. A bright, laughing girl who grabbed my flour-dusted fingers with both hands the first time I held her. Then Claire got sick. Pancreatic cancer diagnosed in March, hospice by October. 8 months of watching the woman who painted our sign and balanced our books disappear a pound at a time. I handled the treatments, the insurance calls, the bakery. 16-hour days. The IV pump clicked and hissed like a metronome counting down something I couldn't stop. My shoulders locked into a permanent hunch from sleeping in hospital chairs. Tori stepped in, offered to take over the bakery's bookkeeping, the insurance paperwork, Rosie's schedule. "Let me handle this," she said one evening, touching my arm at the kitchen table. "You focus on Claire." I handed her the keys to the filing cabinet and went back to the hospital. Claire died on a Tuesday in October, 56 years old. I held her hand until the monitors went flat. Her fingers were still warm. I drove to the bakery and made bread because I didn't know what else to do. I leaned against the filing cabinet now in the dark office and looked at the answering machine on Claire's desk. Its red light blinked in the silence. It had been blinking for 2 years. I'd walked past it every day and never pressed play. After the funeral, I'd asked Ethan why he never came to see his mother. 2 years ago, that phone call. The silence on the line lasted 10 seconds. Then his voice, raw and cracked. "She told me you said I wasn't welcome. That Mom didn't want me to see her like that." My chest locked, muscles between my ribs seized like a cramp. I couldn't pull air. "Who told you that?" I asked. He didn't answer. Neither of us called the other back. I'd spent 2 years after that call thinking Ethan had made excuses. That he'd heard the news about his mother and chosen distance over discomfort. That he'd invented a story to cover his own guilt. I blamed him. I blamed myself. I visited Claire's grave alone every Sunday morning. Same bench under the bare oaks, same gray granite headstone, cold morning air cutting through my jacket and wood smoke drifting from the farm down the road. While Tori sat at our dining table and managed the books, but Claire's letter changed every word of that phone call. She told you he chose not to come. Tori hadn't just lied to Ethan. She'd lied to me, told me my son chose to stay away while his mother died. And I'd believed it, because the grief was so heavy, I couldn't think past it. Tonight, standing in the bakery office with flour still on my hands and Claire's letter in my jacket, I pulled the quarterly tax filings Tori had given me last month. The paper felt wrong. Too thin, too smooth, bright white instead of cream. My fingers knew the difference before my eyes caught up. 20-pound inkjet stock. The bakery's accountant had used 28-pound bond for 30 years. Then I saw the return address printed in the corner. A bank branch in a town 40 miles east. One I'd never heard of. Before the revenge unfolds, hit subscribe because YouTube won't show you another one of my stories if you don't. Now tell me, what do you think happens next? I'd noticed the paper was wrong the night before. Held both sheets under the bare bulb in the storage room and felt the difference with my fingers before my eyes confirmed it. But noticing wasn't proving. Now I needed to lay it out, side by side, the way I used to lay proof sheets against mechanicals before a press run. I spread the filings across Claire's metal desk, Tori's quarterly reports on the left, the bakery's old records from the filing cabinet on the right. I didn't need a loop. The old filings were cream-colored, heavy, 28-pound laser-printed bond with a linen finish, the kind our accountant Harold Stokes had used for 30 years. Crisp text, sharp serifs, letterhead embossed so you could feel it under your thumb. I ran my fingers across the surface. Texture, grain, weight. The paper had authority because it was real. Tori's filings were bright white, smooth, thin as a church bulletin, 20-pound inkjet stock with text edges so fuzzy the numbers bled into each other at the margins. The kind of paper you buy in a 500-sheet ream at the office supply store for $9. I held both sheets up to the fluorescent tube above the desk. The bond was opaque. I could read the desk calendar through Tori's. A man who never handled paper wouldn't see the difference. But I'd loaded pallets of this stuff for 15 years. My hands knew. I pulled Claire's letter from my jacket and sat under the bare bulb in the storage room, where the light was harshest. At 4 in the morning, I'd read it through adrenaline and flour dust. Now I read it slowly. Her handwriting confirmed what the filings suggested. Transfer amounts in neat columns. 5,000 here, 8,000 there. More entries I'd missed in the dark, smaller amounts scattered across months. Every deposit routed to the same account number at a bank branch 40 miles east. The name on the account was blurred where flour moisture had seeped through the bag, but it wasn't Hale. I could make out a B, maybe a second syllable. The rest was gone. I tried to separate the second page. The flour paste had bonded the sheets together along the left edge, and the paper threatened to tear every time I worked my thumbnail into the seam. I stopped. Whatever Claire had written on that second page would have to wait. Forcing it meant losing it. I put everything in a manila folder, stood in the office holding it, looking at Claire's empty chair behind the desk. I could confront Tori, show her the paper, the letter, watch her face. But a printer doesn't confront ink that's wrong. He documents it, pulls a sample, calls the supplier. I drove to the county sheriff's office. Carl Meeks was at the front counter, broad-shouldered, whose daughter's wedding cake Claire had piped until 2 in the morning 12 years ago. "Gideon," Carl said, "what brings you in?" I set the folder on the counter and opened it. Laid Tori's filings next to the originals. Placed Claire's letter beside the bank statements. Let him look. Carl picked up both filings, one in each hand. Looked at them, set them down. "These filings are forged," I said. "Different paper, different numbers. My wife found transfers before she died and hid this letter." "I can see they're different paper," he said. "But, Gideon, this looks like a bookkeeping disagreement. Family finances, business records. Have you talked to your accountant about this?" "I'm talking to you." He shifted his weight. "I hear you, I do, but what you're describing sounds like a civil matter. A family dispute over who filed what. We'd need evidence of criminal intent, and right now, this is one set of papers against another. My wife hid a letter in a flour sack because she was too sick to fight. That's not a bookkeeping disagreement." Carl looked at the letter. "Read it." His jaw worked side to side the way it did when he was uncomfortable. "I'll file a report," he said, "but I'll be honest with you. Nobody's opening an investigation on this. You'd be better off talking to a lawyer or getting your accountant to audit the books." Heat crawled up the back of my neck. I pressed my palms flat on the counter. Smooth laminate, cool under my skin. I counted to 3. File the report, I said. He did. 3 pages. Case number stamped in red ink. I watched him put it in a wire basket on his desk with a dozen others. That afternoon, I called Ethan. His cell number, the one I'd dialed 100 times in the 2 years since Claire died and got nothing back. It rang 4 times. Someone picked up. Gideon, Tori's voice. Warm, concerned. Ethan's at work. Is everything okay? My grip tightened on the phone. I need to talk to my son. I know you do, but he's asked me to handle things right now. He's really struggling with everything, and Rosie's been upset. She heard you were at the sheriff's office today. The blood drained from my hands. I switched the phone to my other ear. I'd filed that report less than 2 hours ago. Carl hadn't even finished his shit. How did you know I was at the sheriff's office? A pause. 1 beat too long. Small town, she said. People talk. Gideon, I think you need to talk to someone. A professional. This obsession with the paperwork isn't healthy. I hung up. The next morning I drove to Harold Stokes's office on Cedar Street. Harold had done the bakery's taxes since we opened. 71 years old, bifocals on a chain, desk buried in paper. He'd known Claire better than most. I handed him Tori's filings. He turned them over once, held them at arm's length, then pulled his glasses down. These aren't mine, he said. I know. Harold stood and went to his filing cabinet, pulled a drawer, thumbed through tabs, and came back with a manila folder of his own. He spread his copies beside Tori's, running his finger down the columns, cross-referencing line by line. The office was quiet, except for the scratch of his pencil and the low hum of the baseboard heater. After several minutes, he set the pencil down. Revenues down 30% on these, but your actual deposits don't support that. Someone rewrote the books. Can you put that in writing? Harold leaned back. I can write a letter confirming these filings didn't come from my office and the numbers don't match my records. But, Gideon, a letter from your accountant isn't enough for criminal charges. You'd need forensic analysis. Chain of custody. Someone with credentials who can testify about the documents themselves. I understand, I said. I'm sorry about Claire, he added. His chair creaked as he shifted forward. She called me in August, before the end. Asked me to pull the originals and keep them safe. I didn't know why at the time. My throat closed. I swallowed twice before I could speak. The baseboard heater clicked off and the room went dead quiet. She knew. She knew, Harold said. Over the next week, fragments drifted in the way they do in a town where everyone knows who supplies your flour. My supplier, Jim Raddick at Great Lakes Milling, left a message. Just checking in, Gideon. Tori said you'd handle it, but she hasn't returned my calls. 3 invoices, 60 days past due. A teller at the credit union. A woman whose son I'd hired one summer caught me in the parking lot after church. She leaned close. I shouldn't be telling you this, she said, but someone opened an account last year under a name I didn't recognize. Started with a B, same address as your son's house. Started with a B, same partial letter I'd made out on Claire's water-damaged page. I thanked her and walked to my truck. Sat behind the wheel for a long time. Every door I'd tried was closed. The sheriff filed a report that would sit in a wire basket until someone recycled it. My son's phone went through Tori. Harold could confirm the fraud but couldn't prove it to a courtroom standard. No judge in the county would accept a printer's hands as evidence. Claire had left me the truth. She'd hidden it where only I'd find it. But truth without proof was just a printer's suspicion. I needed someone else's hands. Someone with credentials who could turn what my fingers felt into something a court could see. I was still working through that thought on Sunday evening when Tori set her fork down at the dinner table, folded her hands, and looked at Ethan, then at me. "I've arranged a meeting," she said, "with Pastor Ennis to discuss your care, Gideon." She paused. "I think it's time we talked about power of attorney." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I set it down on the plate without a sound. Across the table, Ethan wouldn't meet my eyes. 3 days after that Sunday dinner, I walked into the dining room and stopped. Tori had set the table with Claire's china. The blue and white plates from the cabinet, the ones Claire brought out for Thanksgiving and Easter and nothing else. She'd arranged them on the oak table like stage props. Something cold moved through my chest. The blue and white pattern on those plates, Claire's mother's pattern, arranged by a woman who'd never touched them while Claire was alive. She'd positioned Pastor Ennis at the head, where Claire used to sit. Dale Ennis was 61, silver-haired, wearing his Sunday collar on a Wednesday. He'd given Claire's eulogy. Now he was sitting in her chair. He stood and shook my hand with both of his. "Gideon, thank you for being open to this conversation." I took the chair facing the china cabinet. Claire's dried flower arrangement sat between us, untouched for 2 years. Ethan was already seated, buttoned down tight across the shoulders, hands flat on his thighs. He looked at the centerpiece when I sat down, not at me. Tori came from the kitchen with a pitcher of iced tea. Cashmere cardigan. Gold chain at her throat. Every detail calibrated the way you calibrate a press run, everything positioned to print the image she wanted. She poured for the pastor first, then Ethan, then me. The ice clinked against Claire's good glasses. "I want to start by saying, this comes from love," she said, settling into her chair. She touched the pastor's forearm. "Dale, you've known this family a long time. You've seen what grief can do." Ennis nodded. "I have." Gideon talks to Claire's empty chair in the bakery office. "Every morning," she paused. "Let that sit." The heat started at the base of my skull and crawled upward. I pressed my hands flat against my thighs under the table. Last month, he went to the sheriff's office claiming the bank was stealing from him. Deputy Meeks filed a report out of kindness, but there was nothing there. "Rosie told me Grandpa was yelling at the phone last week," Tori continued, "and he forgot her piano recital in September. That's the 3rd event this year." "Rosie doesn't have piano," I said. Tori's eyes went soft, patient. "She started in June, Gideon. Ethan signed her up." I looked at Ethan. He stared at the tablecloth. And for a half second, I wondered if she was right, if I'd missed something, if the grief had eaten holes in my memory I couldn't see. Then I remembered the woman sitting across from me had told my son his dying mother didn't want to see him. I couldn't trust a single word out of her mouth. "Not about piano, not about anything. This is what I mean," Tori said to the pastor. "The confusion, the gaps. It's getting worse." Ennis leaned forward. "Gideon, nobody's questioning your character. We're just wondering if it might be time to let the family help carry some of the weight. The bakery, the finances, the daily decisions. Nobody's questioning your character. That's what people say right before they question everything about you." "What Dale is saying," Tori said, "is that I think we should discuss power of attorney. For your protection. So the bakery stays in the family and someone's watching out for you." Claire's letter pressed against my ribs through the jacket lining. Bank statements, transfer amounts. An account that started with BI could reach into my pocket and end this in 30 seconds. I've already spoken with an attorney, Tori said. The hearing would be in 3 weeks. It's a simple process. We present the medical concerns, the financial irregularities, and a family plan for care. What financial irregularities? I asked. You accused the bank of theft, Gideon. You brought forged-looking papers to the sheriff. That's documented now. She'd turned my own evidence into proof of my decline. The report Carl filed in the wire basket. The visit to the bank branch. Everything I'd done to expose her was now a line item on her petition. Ennis placed his hand on the table, palm down. Gideon, what's best for the family sometimes means stepping back. Claire would want someone looking after things. My jaw locked. Teeth pressed together so hard, my molars ached. You're a 60-year-old man who smells like yeast and talks to his dead wife's flour sacks. You're the reason your son stopped calling. Tori's voice didn't rise. It dropped. The room went dead still. Ennis's hand froze on the table. Ethan's jaw clenched, and he drew a breath through his nose, but didn't speak. Didn't move. My fists balled under the table, knuckles white against my khakis. The letter crinkled against my chest. I could feel the outline of the folded pages through the fabric. One motion. Left hand, inside pocket, unfold, place on the table. Watch her face. Watch Ennis's face. Watch Ethan's. But then Tori would know. She'd know what Claire found, what the paper proved, which account the money went to. By morning, she'd have the record shredded, the account closed, Rosie in a car headed for another state. She'd move fast. Tori always moved fast. My fists unclenched, one finger at a time. I'll think about it, I said. Tori smiled. Not wide, just enough. The same smile she used when she handed me the quarterly reports. Ennis stood and put his hand on my shoulder. You're doing the right thing, Gideon. Pray on it. I drove home with both hands on the wheel and my vision locked on the center line. Claire's letter sat in my jacket on the passenger seat. I carried it inside and set it on my desk under the banker's lamp. The 2 pages were still bonded along the left edge. Flour paste, dried and hardened over 2 years in that sack. I'd tried to separate them the first night and stopped when the paper started to tear. I filled a shallow dish with warm water, laid a cotton cloth over the surface, and pressed the sealed edge against it. Held it there, both hands steady, thumbs applying pressure the way you press a proof sheet against a stone. 2 minutes. 3, the fibers softened. I could feel the grain direction change under my fingertips as the moisture reached the bond, the paper relaxing the way cotton rag stock does when humidity hits it. I worked my thumbnail into the seam, a millimeter at a time. The pages gave. Claire's handwriting on the second page, smaller, rushed. The ink had bled where the moisture seeped through, but the words were legible. Her maiden name is Victoria Blaine. The account is under Blaine. My breathing slowed. The green lamplight steadied. Below that, in script that slanted hard to the right like she'd been writing in a hurry or in pain, ask about Nell Whitaker in Pennsylvania. She did this before. I read it twice, set the page down, picked it up, and read it again. She did this before. Not a wife who got greedy. Not a daughter-in-law who saw an opportunity and took it. A pattern. A profession. A woman who found families with aging parents and profitable businesses and moved through them like a disease. Something cold settled behind my eyes. Not anger, past anger. Every piece of a press run finally registering true. 3 weeks until the hearing. I had a name. I had a prior victim. I had 21 days. At dawn, I loaded the forged filings, Claire's letter, and Harold's originals into a folder and drove to the house of Phil Beckman, a retired document examiner who'd authenticated print work for the county courts for 20 years. Phil's garage light was already on. 20 days left. Phil Beckman had more years in document authentication than most people spend in any career, and his garage proved it. He'd cleared half the workbench before I pulled into the driveway. Fluorescent tubes hummed overhead. A backlit light table glowed white in the corner. Jeweler's loupes and leather cases lined the shelf beside a UV inspection lamp with a purple-tinted bulb the size of a coffee mug. Phil was 63, barrel-chested, hands like vice grips. I'd hired him at the print shop in 1994 when he was fresh out of a bad stretch, and nobody else would take his calls. He worked for me 5 years before moving into court authentication work, examining questioned documents for the county for 2 decades after that. He never said, "Thank you." He didn't need to. 20 years of showing up early and leaving late said it for him. I set the manila folder on the light table. He opened it without asking what was inside. He picked up the first transfer authorization form, one of 6 Tori had submitted to the bank with my signature on each. Held it flat under the fluorescent tube, tilted it 45 degrees, then laid it on the light table and pulled a loop from the shelf. I watched his eyes narrow behind the lens as he tracked across the page, moving in a grid pattern the way we used to inspect press sheets for registration errors. He stopped on my signature line, adjusted the loop, leaned closer. "Look," he said. I bent over the table. Through the magnification, the authorization form's center crease was visible as a faint ridge running horizontally through the paper. My signature crossed that crease, and the ink sat on top of the fold line in a smooth, unbroken layer. No disruption, no skip, no variation in density where the pen would have hit the ridge. My breathing slowed, spine straightened. "If you'd signed this before it was folded," Phil said, "the ink would break at the crease." Pen ink rides the surface. When the paper folds, the ink cracks along the ridge. You get microscopic gaps. And if the signature was printed after the fold, inkjet lays down a uniform layer. Doesn't care about the surface beneath it. Ink sits on top of the crease like it was never there. He tapped the loop against the edge of the table. Amateur hour. She didn't even match the DPI to a laser output. He moved to the UV lamp, killed the fluorescence. The purple bulb clicked on, and the room shifted to violet shadow. Phil held the authorization form under the light. The paper blazed, bright, vivid blue-white. The optical brighteners in cheap inkjet stock fluorescing under ultraviolet in a way that bond paper never does. The text glowed with a faint purple haze. Inkjet dye, not laser toner. Phil placed Harold's original filing beside it. Under the same UV light, the bond stock showed a muted, warm response. Cream-toned, subdued. The laser toner was invisible under UV2 documents that claimed to come from the same office. And under the right light, they looked like they came from different planets. "Every one of these transfers," Phil said. He spread the authorization forms across the light table, 6 of them, each bearing my signature, each one glowing that same false blue. "Every signature is printed. Same inkjet, same stock, same method." He paused on the 4th form, held it closer, then checked it against the others. "This one's different," he said. Different printer, the dot pattern's finer. Higher resolution. What does that mean? Could mean she replaced her printer partway through. Could mean someone else printed this one for her. He set it aside and kept working. Phil had already been adding the figures from the bank statements Claire had hidden. He turned a notepad toward me. His handwriting, blocky and mechanical, listed transfer dates and amounts running down the page. At the bottom, circled twice, $280,000. My hands went cold against the light table. $280,000. 3,000 here, 8,000 there. 25 years of wedding cakes and church orders and graduation receptions routed to an account under Victoria Blaine. Phil gathered the documents into a stack, squared the edges the way you square a ream before loading a press, and walked to the copier in the corner. He ran duplicates of everything. The originals went back in my folder. The copies went into a padded mailer he pulled from a drawer. "What are you doing?" "Mailing these to the county sheriff." He wrote the address from memory. He'd sent evidence packages to that office a dozen times during his court work. Not the front desk where Carl had filed his report in the wire basket. The Elder Fraud Division, a separate unit. If something happens to yours, they'll have a set. I didn't argue. A pressman who doesn't keep backups isn't a pressman. Phil sealed the mailer and set it by the door. I drove home with the folder on the passenger seat and the number still pressing against my ribs like a fist. I'd requested a Pennsylvania phone directory from the library's reference desk 2 days earlier, the morning after I separated Claire's second page. It was waiting on my kitchen table where I'd left it. Whitaker. N. Rural address outside of Greensburg. I dialed 4 rings. A woman answered, thin voice, careful. "Mrs. Whitaker, my name is Gideon Hale. I'm calling from Ohio. I need to ask you about someone named Victoria Blaine." Silence. Then a sound like air leaving a tire. "Oh God," she said, "she's done it to someone else." Nell Whitaker was 74, retired schoolteacher. She talked for 40 minutes. Her voice broke 3 times, but she never stopped. Identical scheme. Tori had attached through Nell's son, a pharmacist in Pittsburgh. Married him within a year, took over household finances, started siphoning savings, built a paper trail of forged documents. When Nell's daughter-in-law noticed discrepancies, Tori vanished, left the state, left the marriage, left Nell $140,000 lighter with a son who wouldn't speak to her for 2 years because Tori had told him his mother was trying to control his life. "There's a warrant," Nell said, "in Westmoreland County. She never showed up for the hearing. Would you be willing to sign an affidavit?" "I'll sign anything you need. I'll drive to Ohio if I have to. That woman took my son from me for 2 years and stole my retirement. You tell me where to sign." I hung up and sat with the phone in my lap. The kitchen was quiet. Claire's letter lay on the table, both pages separated, the second one with its rushed handwriting slanting hard to the right. She'd been writing with tubes in her arms, morphine pulling at her mind, and she'd still found the name. Jim Raddick's unpaid invoices. The bank teller's whisper about an account that started with B. Every fragment that had drifted in over the past weeks now locked into place against Claire's letter and Phil's forensic proof. The picture was complete, except for the 4th authorization form and its finer dot pattern. Someone else's printer. A detail I put in the folder and left alone. For now, Phil called that evening. "Why don't we just go to the house?" he said. "Lay it all out. Every document. Watch her try to explain ink over a crease. My pulse picked up. Hands tightened on the phone. I could see it. Tori at the kitchen table, the forged authorization spread in front of her. Phil's loop in my hand, the UV lamp turning her careful work into a neon confession. Her face when she realized a printer had read her paper. Then I thought about Rosie, 6 years old, playing upstairs while her grandfather confronted her mother with evidence that would end her life as she knew it. And Ethan. His face if I attacked his wife in their living room with no witnesses except a retired pressman and a manila folder. A private confrontation gave Tori a story. She'd cry, she'd spin, she'd tell Ethan I was delusional, that Phil was humoring a confused old man, that the documents were planted. Without witnesses, without authority in the room, it was my word against hers. And she'd been winning that contest for 5 years. Not yet, I said. Not like that. Past midnight, I stood in my office under the green lamplight, arranging letterpress blocks on the desk. Dark walnut letters, each one smooth and warm under my thumb, raised characters reversed for printing. I placed them one at a time, reading backwards the way a printer reads type. The POA hearing was 12 days away. I could hand every document to a lawyer tomorrow morning, sign a retainer, and go back to making bread. Let the system handle it. Walk away. I picked up Claire's second page from the desk. The handwriting slanted hard to the right, pressed deep into the paper. She'd been gripping the pen the way you grip something when your hands don't want to work anymore. She did this before, written in pain, hidden in flour, left for me to find. Walking away meant Ethan never learned what those words cost her to write. I disassembled the letters, put each block back on its shelf by touch, the raised characters cool under my fingertips. Then I went to bed. Phil called at 7 the next morning. Got a call from the sheriff's office, he said. Detective named Joanna Marsh, Elder Fraud Unit. She got my package. Something loosened behind my ribs. A band I hadn't known was there. She wants to meet, Phil said. Today. Marsh was direct on the phone. 48 from her voice. Clipped sentences. No small talk. She'd run Tori's background. The Pennsylvania warrant had surfaced. Mr. Hale, we're going to need you to set up a meeting with your family. All of them. Before that court date. Sunday dinner, I said. Same table, same house. I'll make the call. I dialed Ethan's number. Tori answered as she always did. I told her I'd been thinking about what she said, about the power of attorney, about stepping back. I told her I wanted to talk it through as a family. Sunday evening, the dining room. She accepted without hesitation. Then she asked if Pastor Ennis should come too. Yes, I said. Bring him. Her voice carried the warm certainty of a woman who believed she'd already won. She was bringing reinforcements. So was I. That afternoon, Marsh called back with one question. Are you sure you want your granddaughter in the house when it happens? I'd sent Rosie upstairs with a coloring book and a promise of pie after dinner. She went without argument. Good kid. Above me, her footsteps crossed the hallway and stopped. A door closed. The house settled into the kind of quiet that comes before something breaks. The oak table was set with Claire's china. I'd done it myself this time. Blue and white plates, the lace runner, the dried flower arrangement she'd made before she got sick. Ethan sat across from me, rigid in his button-down. Pastor Ennis had taken the chair nearest the door, hands folded over his belly. Tori sat at the end, cashmere cardigan, gold chain at her throat, iced tea poured and waiting. The kitchen door behind her was cracked open. Through the gap, I could see the edge of Detective Marsh's shoe. Under my chair, wrapped in a dish towel, the bakery's answering machine sat on the floor between my boots. The cord wound tight around the base. I set a manila folder on the table and opened it. Before we talk about anything else, I said, I want to show you something. I placed Tori's quarterly filings on the left, Harold's originals on the right, side by side on Claire's lace runner. These are the filings you gave me. These are Harold's. Different paper. Different numbers. Tori picked up her glass, sipped, set it down. Gideon, this is exactly what I mean about your confusion. Her voice carried the same easy tone she used at church potlucks. Harold uses different vendors. Paper changes. You're reading into things that aren't there. Ennis shifted in his chair. Ethan stared at the centerpiece. I pulled the next document from the folder. An 8 by 10 magnification photograph, Phil's work, showing the authorization form's center crease under a jeweler's loop. I placed it beside the filings and pointed to the signature line. This is my signature on a transfer authorization. Under magnification, the ink sits on top of the crease. Uniform layer, no break in the line. I looked at her. If I'd signed this before it was folded, the ink would crack at the ridge. This signature was printed onto the page after it was creased. Tori's smile tightened. The corners held, but something left her eyes. You scanned my signatures from old documents and reprinted them, I said. On 20-pound inkjet stock that glows blue under UV light. Bond paper doesn't do that. This is ridiculous. Her voice dropped half a register. She turned to Pastor Ennis. Dale, you've known this family. You know Gideon. Tell him this isn't rational. Ennis opened his mouth, closed it. His hands stayed folded in his lap, but his thumbs pressed hard against each other. He said nothing. Tori's gaze held on the pastor for 2 full seconds. When no words came back, something shifted behind her face. The first crack I'd seen that wasn't performance. She turned to Ethan. Are you hearing this? Your father is accusing me of forgery. Ethan's jaw worked, but nothing came out. I laid down the bank statements. Claire's bank statements, the one she'd hidden in the flour sack with the letter. Transfer dates in columns. Amounts. And the receiving account number, printed in the bank's system font beside a name. $280,000, I said. Transferred in increments of 3 to 8,000 over 3 years. Every deposit went to an account at Millbrook Savings under the name Victoria Blaine. The color left Tori's face. Forehead first, then cheeks, then lips. Your maiden name, I said. The one you never told this family. Ennis unfolded his hands. His palms pressed flat against the oak. Tori's chin dropped. Her eyes filled. I don't know what Claire thought she found, but there's an explanation. I was moving money between accounts for the bakery. Gideon, I was trying to help. $280,000 into an account under your birth name is not helping. The tears stopped. Her back straightened. She looked at me the way she'd looked at me across this same table 3 weeks ago, when she'd called me a 60-year-old man who smelled like yeast. If you push this, she said, I'll take Rosie. You will never see that girl again, neither of you. The threat hung in the air. Ennis's hand curled around the table edge. Ethan drew a sharp breath through his nose. I let the silence sit for 5 seconds. Then I dropped my voice. You stole $280,000 from this bakery. You made sure Ethan never got Claire's messages. You told my son his dying mother didn't want to see him. You told me my son chose not to come. My pulse was steady, my hands flat on the table. You let Claire die thinking she'd failed to protect her family. And you've done this before. To a woman named Nell Whitaker in Greensburg, Pennsylvania. Same scheme, same lies. Same disappearing act, except this time there's a warrant you never showed up for. Tori's mouth opened, closed, opened again. That's not? Nell signed an affidavit. She'll testify. I reached under my chair, lifted the dish towel bundle, and set the answering machine on the table between the bank statements and the dried flowers. Beige plastic. Miniature cassette window clouded with age. Dust along the seam where the casing met the base. The red light still blinking after 2 years. Nobody spoke. Ethan looked at the machine and his brow creased. He didn't understand yet. Claire couldn't reach Ethan on his cell, I said, so she called the bakery line. The machine records to magnetic tape, not digital. Nothing to delete unless you know it's there. I pressed play. The tape hissed. A click. Then Claire's voice, thin and strained and alive, filled every corner of the room. Ethan, baby, it's Mom. I don't have much time, sweetheart. Please come. I've been calling. I don't know if you're getting my messages. Please, I need to see you. I love you so much. Please come. The machine clicked off. My hands pressed harder against the oak, knuckles going white. I held them there until the pressure steadied, then forced them flat again. Ethan's face came apart. Not all at once. His mouth opened first, then his eyes flooded, then his shoulders curled forward and his forehead hit his hands on the table. A sound came out of him that I'd never heard from my son, low and broken and airless. His eyes moved to Tori's face just once, and what passed across them was a man rereading every memory he had and finding the forgery in each one. I kept my eyes on Tori. She was looking at the answering machine the way you look at something that shouldn't exist. Her lips moved, no words. The woman who always had the right phrase, the smooth redirect, the easy deflection for every occasion, sat at Claire's table with Claire's china in front of her and Claire's voice still ringing off the walls and had nothing. The kitchen door swung open. Detective Joanna Marsh stepped through. 48, short brown hair, badge on her belt. She held a pair of handcuffs in her right hand and a folded warrant in her left. Victoria Blaine, Marsh said, you're under arrest for felony financial exploitation of an elder, forgery, and failure to appear on an outstanding warrant in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania. Stand up, please. Tori looked at the door. Then at Ethan, still bent over the table with his face in his hands. Then at the handcuffs. She stood. Ennis pushed back from the table. His chair scraped the hardwood. He stood slowly, stepped away from Tori's side of the room, and put his hand on the back of his own chair like he needed something solid under his fingers. He didn't look at her. He looked at the answering machine. Marsh cuffed her in the dining room, read her rights in the same even tone she'd used on the phone, and walked her through the front door into the evening light. The neighbors across the street were on their porch. The Caldwells, 2 doors down, had their curtains open. Tori walked to the unmarked car in handcuffs, honey blonde hair catching the last of the autumn sun. The front door closed. The house went quiet. Marsh's car pulled away from the curb. I looked down at the manila folder, counted the authorization forms. 5. There had been 6. The 4th form, the one Phil had flagged, the one printed on a different machine with the finer dot pattern, wasn't in the stack. I flipped through every page. Bank statements, magnification photos, Claire's letter, 5 authorization forms where there should have been 6. Upstairs, Rosie's footsteps crossed the hallway again. And at the table, Ethan still hadn't lifted his head. Judge Margaret Calloway reviewed the transfer records for 12 minutes without speaking. 64. Reading glasses on a silver chain, seated behind the bench in a courtroom that smelled like floor polish and old wood. She turned pages the way I used to check proof sheets. Slow, thorough, looking for the thing that didn't belong. She found all of it. Full restitution, she said, looking at Tori's attorney across the courtroom, plus seizure of any assets purchased with misappropriated funds pending final disposition. Something behind my ribs loosened. A band I hadn't known was still there, the same one that had been tightening since the night I found Claire's letter in the flour sack. Not gone, just eased. I pressed my palms flat against my thighs and let the breath come. Tori's attorney, a young man from Columbus named David Pratt, who kept adjusting his tie, stood. Your Honor, my client's primary residence was purchased 18 months ago with funds traceable to the Hale bakery accounts. The deed is flagged. Next motion, the subdivision house went on the list. The court's countertops, the landscaping, the furniture, everything Tori had built with money she'd taken $3,000 at a time from a man who was kneading dough 10 feet from the filing cabinet she'd emptied. By Thursday, 4 days after the Sunday arrest, the court had frozen Tori's account at Knowbrook Savings. $288,000 locked behind a judge's signature. The forensic accountants traced every deposit back to the bakery's operating funds. 3,000 here, 8,000 there. 3 years of skimmed deposits converted into a line item on a restitution order. I sat in the gallery and watched it happen. My chest expanded on the inhale. Not satisfaction, relief. The criminal charges landed the same week. Felony elder financial exploitation under Ohio statute, 5 to 15 years. Each forged authorization form counted as a separate forgery offense. 5 documents, 5 counts. The 6th form, the one Phil had flagged with the finer dot pattern, was still missing from my folder. Marsh had noted it in the case file as under separate investigation. The prosecutor, a woman named Sandra Chen from the county attorney's office, laid the 5 on the evidence table like playing cards. Then Pratt moved to suppress Claire's letter. Hearsay, he argued. A deceased person's unsworn statement, no opportunity for cross-examination, no chain of custody beyond a flour sack in a storage room. The judge took it under advisement for 48 hours. I sat in my truck in the courthouse parking lot and gripped the steering wheel until the leather creaked under my fingers. 2 days later, Calloway ruled the letter admissible as a statement of then-existing mental state under the hearsay exception. Claire had been documenting what she'd witnessed, not testifying about someone else's actions. The letter stayed in evidence. Then Pennsylvania called. The Westmoreland County warrant had been sitting in a database for 4 years. Failure to appear on fraud charges stemming from Nell Whitaker's case. Detective Marsh had flagged it during the background check, and now it entered the record alongside Nell's sworn affidavit. 8 pages, notarized, describing an identical scheme against a 74-year-old retired schoolteacher. Same method, same lies, same vanishing act. Pratt requested a recess. When he came back, he leaned close to Tori at the defense table and spoke for 2 minutes. She shook her head. He spoke again. She stared straight ahead, jaw set, hands flat on the table in front of her. The fluorescent courthouse lights stripped the warmth from her skin. No cashmere cardigan, no gold chain. The clothes she'd been arrested in, wrinkled now, hair pulled back flat. She looked 10 years older than the woman who'd poured iced tea at Claire's table. Pratt stood. "Your Honor, we'd like to discuss plea options." Gil Ransom was at the hardware store counter when I stopped in that afternoon. He bought his lumber from the same register for 30 years. He set down a box of deck screws and looked at me. "That true about Tori?" he asked. "It's true." He picked up the screws. "Claire would have caught it sooner than anybody." "She did," I said. "She caught it first. Sunday morning, I sat on the same bench under the bare oaks at the cemetery. The granite headstone was cold under my hand. I didn't need to say anything. She already knew. Pastor Ennis stood at his pulpit that afternoon. I was in my usual pew, third row left. The church was full, standing room. People who hadn't attended in months filled the back benches and lined the walls. Ennis gripped the edges of the oak pulpit with both hands. His knuckles went white. "I owe this congregation an apology," he said, "and I owe Gideon Hale more than an apology. I vouched for someone I didn't know. I counseled a man I've known for decades to show grace to the person who was robbing him. I was wrong. I failed a family that trusted me, and I failed the memory of Claire Hale." He stopped on Claire's name, looked at the floor. His hands stayed locked on the pulpit edge, but his shoulders dropped, and he stepped back and sat down without another word. The church was silent for 10 seconds. Then Margaret Caldwell, whose daughter's wedding cake Claire had decorated until 2 in the morning, began to clap. Others joined, not loud, not cheering, the sound of a community correcting itself. The scrapbook albums were cataloged during the asset seizure. Investigators photographed every page. Marsh called me into the station to identify personal items, and that's where I saw it. One album lay open on the evidence table under the fluorescent lights. A glossy 4x6 photograph, time-stamped in orange digits at the bottom corner. October 14th, a Saturday. Tori in a white spa robe, champagne glass raised, grinning at the camera. Marble countertops behind her, rolled towels, the edge of a pool. October 14th. I remembered October 14th. Cold settled deep in my stomach, below the ribs, the kind of cold that doesn't come from temperature. October 14th was the Saturday I'd slept in the hospital chair beside Claire's bed while the IV pump clicked and hissed and her breathing rattled through the oxygen mask. The Saturday the hospice nurse had pulled me into the hallway and said it could be any day now. The Saturday Tori had told Ethan she was sitting at Claire's bedside so I could rest. Claire died 3 days later. I set the photograph down on the evidence table and walked out of the room. Stood in the station hallway with my back against the cinder block wall and my hands pressed flat against my thighs until the cold passed. It didn't pass entirely. I don't think it ever will. That photo made the rounds before the week was out. I didn't spread it, didn't need to. Small towns have their own circulation. Ethan filed for divorce on a Thursday. Full custody of Rosie. The paperwork was clean, direct, no hedging. I recognized something in the decision. No waiting for someone else to act. No deferring to Tori's certainty. My son had stopped explaining himself and started moving. Tori's attorney put out calls for character witnesses. Defense proceedings needed them. People who could speak to her role in the community, her devotion to family. Pratt called the church, the scrapbooking circle, the school volunteer coordinator, the food bank where Tori had organized the Christmas toy drive. Not one person agreed to testify. The background check Marsh ran turned up something else. Victoria Blaine had no employment history outside of families she'd defrauded. No W-2s from a legitimate employer. No tax returns showing independent income. Every reference she'd given traced back to a family she was robbing. The pharmacist's wife in Pennsylvania, the baker's daughter-in-law in Ohio. Roles, not jobs, performances, not careers. Every alias was in the county court record now. Victoria Blaine, Tori Hale, whatever she'd called herself in between. Searchable, public, permanent. She couldn't become someone new again. I thought about her scrapbook albums, the linen covers, the metallic ink, the layered paper and ribbon borders documenting a family she was dismantling page by page. Those albums were evidence exhibits now, tagged and numbered and stored in a courthouse basement under fluorescent lights that would never make them look the way she'd intended. The doorbell rang on a Tuesday evening. I was in the kitchen, hands washed, coffee going cold on the counter. I dried my palms on the dish towel and walked to the front door. My hand tightened on the doorframe before I opened it. Ethan stood on the porch, with Rosie on his hip. The porch light caught the red in his swollen eyes, and the wrinkles in yesterday's shirt, collar creased, sleeves pushed up past his forearms. Rosie had her face pressed against his neck, one small hand gripping his collar, fingers curled tight in the fabric, the way she used to grip my flour-dusted fingers when she was a baby. My son looked at me. His mouth worked twice before the words came. "Dad," he said, his voice broke on the word. "I need to tell you something about Mom's last week." Tap-like, because every single one helps someone suffering in silence find my story. And tell me honestly, did I cross the line? Ethan talked for an hour. The calls he'd made to the bakery in Claire's last month. The texts Tori deleted before he could read them. The voicemail he left on Claire's hospital phone that Tori picked up and erased while I was asleep in the chair beside the bed. I listened for an hour. When he finished, neither of us spoke for a long time. Rosie had fallen asleep against his shoulder, one small hand still gripping his collar. My throat ached from holding still that long. The muscles had locked, and I had to work my jaw twice before I could swallow. I'd do all of it again. The flour sack, the filings, the months of documentation and patience, and sitting in my office at midnight arranging dead wood letters into phrases my wife would never say out loud again. But I won't pretend it didn't cost me. 2 years I spent visiting Claire's grave alone, believing my son had chosen distance over his dying mother. 2 years Ethan spent 8 miles away, believing his father had shut the door. No verdict returns a single hour of that. The weight of those lost days sits in my chest like a stone in wet dough. You learn to work around it. You never get it out. Tori received 8 years. Felony elder financial exploitation across 2 states, 5 counts of forgery. Full restitution of the $280,000. Every alias entered the public record. The woman who survived by becoming someone new ran out of names. 6 months after the arrest, the bakery smells the way it's supposed to. Sourdough and warm wheat and the faint sweetness of rye flour at 4 in the morning when the ovens come up to temperature. The ovens tick as they heat, metal expanding, a sound I've heard 10,000 times and still listen for. Ethan works the early shift before his logistics job. He arrives at 5, ties on an apron, and kneads dough. His hands knew at 6 and forgot at 18. His form is coming back. The heel of the palm, the quarter turn, the fold. He doesn't rush it. I watch from the office doorway and say nothing, because the dough is teaching him the same lesson it taught me. You feed it, you wait, you trust the process. Saturdays, Rosie helps me measure flour. She stands on the same step stool Ethan used 30 years ago, her small hands disappearing into the white powder up to her wrists. She packs the measuring cup too tight, and I show her how to level it with the back of a knife. My palms are warm and steady when I guide her grip. Flour dust settles on her apron and her eyelashes and the tip of her nose, and she laughs. Last Sunday, Ethan and I drove to the cemetery together. First time since the funeral. The oaks along the gravel path had started to bud, pale green against gray bark. We stood at Claire's headstone, breath visible in the March air, and didn't speak for a while. The granite was cold under my palm. I pressed harder and held it there until the cold moved into my fingers and up through my wrist. I called 37 times that last month, Ethan said. Every time it went to voicemail or Tori picked up. She told me you'd changed the bakery number. I never changed the number. I know that now. He looked at the headstone. When you played that tape, hearing her voice wasn't the surprise. I'd been trying to hear it for 2 years. We stood there until the cold pushed through our jackets. Then we drove back to the bakery and made bread. Claire used to say, the flour remembers everything. Every hand that touched it. Every temperature change. Every moment of patience or neglect baked into the grain. I used to think that was her way of talking about bread. Turns out she was right about more than bread. If you made it this far, you understand. Tell me your story in the comments, because the people here don't judge, we support. And share this with someone who needs to hear that it gets better.